And hello, hun, welcome along. Hi, it's Kathy Frey here from IMCO, from the International Integrative Maternity Healthcare Organisation. And welcome along to those who will be joining us today. And a big hello to Julie Cottle. Julie, say hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me again, Kathy.
Oh, it is really good to have you along. We actually haven't spoken around the topic of lactation for a little while, and we all sort of felt it was a little bit overdue. And the thing with Julie is that because she is a lactation consultant, what you tend to be dealing with is you're sort of like the ambulance at the end of the cliff, right? That by the time women are coming to see you, you're often like the savior and rescuer, and there's a whole lot of other kind of preventable stuff that happened to lead up to that point, eh?
That's right. It's sadly very common. It's very common for me to be seeing people that that are in a situation that they didn't plan to be in. They planned to be breastfeeding. They thought that they were in a position where they were going to be able to work through issues. They trusted that they were going to be working with the right people to not end up with problems that needed fixing in the first place. And often early intervention in the way of education throughout pregnancy and just knowing what to expect afterwards and knowing where to go for help can be a really big boost for those women.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for which we'll be talking about today. But so for those of you who haven't seen Julie before, she's a naturopath and an international board certified lactation consultant, and she's always been on quite a mission to help all women reconnect, into that wisdom of their bodies and their cycles and communities, and really navigate, modern motherhood with an overall sense of peace, which is, boy, that's a rare commodity in those first weeks, and you do see it, but more often than not, peace is really the antonym of what we're seeing, what's going on.
It is.
Yeah, and you would see that maybe, sort of quite often with that first baby, it's just all such a big, huge learning curve. And with the second, it's this whole juggle of, oh, I've got another child and I've got this child, and it's sort of, that's quite a mind mess. But often what I've seen is it's the thirds, and the thirds are where the mother is chilled out. She's got two chaotic ones in the background. She's like, whatever, and she's learned so much over the years of breastfeeding and problems and hiccups, and she's just, you will see peace with the third, which is kind of ironic sometimes.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
today,
I think it's like you're giving in at that point. You've surrendered.
You've surrendered. It's the best word for it. So the topic today that Julie's going to be going into some deep dive on is really those three biggest reasons that mothers stop breastfeeding earlier than they'd hoped, and how that can be helped really. So why don't I just kind of hand over to you, and you start to go through those topics, and because you deal with them all the time.
Okay. All right. Well, number one, my first biggest reason that women stop breastfeeding earlier than they'd hoped is low milk supply. And all the factors that can feed into feeling like you've got no milk supply. There's a term that's commonly used, perceived low milk supply. There's a whole bunch of things that can make a mum feel like that she hasn't got as much milk as she needs. Often that's just a perception. Often it's not it's not true, it's not real, and what she needs is a health professional to come in and help her to assess the situation and to assess her milk supply, assess her baby, and and to work with her to help her reach her breastfeeding goals. So
Yeah,
I think
I would, because Julie is a international board certified LC. I am not. I'm a midwife, and obviously we deal a lot with breastfeeding. But certainly I think because you're not putting liquid in a bottle that you can see how much is there, there is certainly a lack of confidence often with women, that because they're just putting the baby directly to their breast, they sort of feel like, oh my God, I don't know how much it's had.
yeah.
I don't know what you say to women, but my sort of go-to would always be wet nappies. That's it. If you're if you've got a baby that's making half a dozen wet nappies a day, and is putting on 100 grams a week, you might say, oh, well, yeah, that's a little bit on the low side. But you got a baby that's putting out 10 or 12 wet nappies a day. I just say to the woman, never worry about your milk supply, because it's evident.
Yeah, exactly.
Milk in, wee out.
Yes, that's right. If you're getting good wet nappies, then that's great. If you're getting the right amount of stools a day, and that's another thing that we need to be wary of as well. Although stools are not always a great indicator of whether or not there's enough going in.
Yeah, it can be a tough one, because anywhere from sort of half a dozen poos a day to one poo every half a dozen days is kind of normal for breast milk fed babies. But so what sort of amount do you talk about, an amount of wet nappies that you regard as how do you talk about it to women?
Well, I still talk about it in terms of 6 to 8 wet cloth nappies, which was what I learned way back when, but we translate that to about 4 heavy wet disposable nappies a day. So if you're taking off a nappy and it's got some weight to it and it feels, you can hold it and you can sort of feel, feels weighty, then that's a good wee. And if you're getting if you're getting 4 to 6 of those a day, then, and you've got a baby that's, that looks well fed and is doing well, then it's unlikely that you've got a supply problem.
Yeah, really unlikely.
Yeah.
A whole lot of heavy wet nappies and a baby that's getting bonnier and bonnier. Yeah, no milk problem.
Yeah, that's right. And it is really common for women who have these babies that are kind of happy and that are putting out wet nappies. They're still quite concerned about milk supply. They're still, it's a very common anxiety. It's something that we seem to be, we go into pregnancy and it's really common to be having conversations with your friends about, oh, I didn't have enough milk to breastfeed. I hope that you have better luck than me. And, all of these things that we're going into the experience with, all these barriers start really, really early, often with watching, you might have watched your own mum struggle to breastfeed a sibling or something like that. We go into it expecting it to be a difficult thing and expecting to be potentially one of the people that so-called fails. Like it does, people do really set it up to be a pass-fail scenario, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely so right. And back in the 100, 200 odd plus years ago, in the village situation, and where wet nursing was more common, where one woman would feed another woman's baby, what do you do if you've got any concerns? Well, you feed it, because you can't go to a supermarket and buy some formula. So there was this expectation that it had to work, and women saw other women breastfeeding and they would see the solutions, and they would see the fact that a baby could thrive even if there were some issues, a baby could still thrive because of the village's combined knowledge on
Yes.
breastfeeding and the solutions, right? But
Yeah.
so often these days, women who are breastfeeding, it's the first time that they've learned about breastfeeding, and it's their own breastfeeding, whereas it just, it's the same thing with birth, isn't it? That, couples these days often when, they go into labor, that's the very first labor they've ever attended. They've never seen it
No idea
before.
what to expect. They've seen it
Yeah,
on TV and on movies,
which
which has
is
given them a
not what it's like.
completely wrong
And
idea.
yeah, and so it's the same, isn't it? That you don't have that whole intergenerational, you don't have the same level of family that all live in the same house. You do see that within Chinese and Indian communities, but within Chinese communities, often those mothers and mother-in-laws have very poor knowledge on breastfeeding. They only had one baby, and there was decades within China where it was not illegal. I still think it's not illegal, I think, in China, that you can say anything you want about formula and there's no regulations on it. So and Indians there would be a little bit more knowledge there, but within sort of generally kind of European based communities, it's not often that you see mums or mother-in-laws and things living in the same household who have great knowledge on breastfeeding, or big sisters who can sit there all day with you. They're busy going to work. They can't do that.
Yeah, that's right.
Women are so isolated, aren't they?
They really are. Yeah. Sorry.
That's right. So why don't we just highlight maybe what you think are the big three, and then we'll come back and sort of deep dive into them.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, my second
They'll probably
one.
cross over a bit.
Yeah, well, they certainly do. So the second one is really a symptom of reason number one, and it's worry about baby's weight gain, which is another really common anxiety, and it may or may not be justified, but it's a really common reason for women to stop breastfeeding.
And do you have a bit of a go-to on what you would say is fine and to not be stressing about with weight gain? What do you kind of say?
Well, we certainly don't want to be seeing babies losing weight beyond that second week, where after we expect them to have regained their birth weight. We don't want to be seeing babies losing weight, and if we are seeing that, then that's something that needs to be referred to, for pediatric assessment pretty quickly.
Yeah.
What
do you have like a minimum weight that you would generally talk about?
I try and steer clear of giving really solid weight guidelines. I actually really like to teach women to tune into their own innate knowledge. If your baby is looking like they're thriving, if they're having those wet nappies, if they're feeding, if they're growing, you can tell if your baby is getting bigger. You're going to be getting plenty of weigh-ins and whatever through your hospital or through your midwife visiting program. I feel like women don't need extra anxiety about weights from me. So I just like to try and give them things that they can look at and know that they're doing okay.
Yeah, and that's so wet nappies at the end of the day. When you're seeing what's a wet nappies and a baby that's healthy and responsive and has periods of alert and periods of sleep, and it's not just as floppy, yeah, I would say that from a midwifery perspective, from a clinical standpoint, we would say that generally 100 grams a week or 500 grams a month, or thereabouts, is a reassuring that that's not a red flag, that's on the lower side, but that's not wrong, or but if we saw somebody, a baby that, say for example, had only put on 250 or 300 grams in 4 weeks, that's then that's definitely a bit of a red flag. But of course that all comes down to when you weigh a baby, has that baby just the previous weight, it might have been that the baby had just been fed, and now this time you're weighing the baby when it's due for a feed, and that can make 100 grams, 150 gram
Makes a
difference, right?
huge difference,
Yeah,
especially when
because
we're talking about 4 kilos of human. It's a lot.
exactly, yeah. So if you've got because when a baby has drunk, say 150 mils or something in a feed, well, that's 150 grams. So they're going to weigh more. Yeah. So some of those has to be all kind of accounted for, don't they?
Yeah, it
Um,
does. We need to make sure,
yeah. So
that we're
you're talking
using
about,
like proper
oh,
scales,
sorry.
that we're using, that we're using the same scales every time, that they're calibrated properly. It's best if you're getting the same person to weigh you with the same set of scales. And any variation in that is going to cause a difference in the weights that you actually see coming off the scale, and that can be really disconcerting for a lot of people.
Yeah. And so perceived undersupply, and worries about weight gain.
Yes. Okay, so the third one is mums with chronic health conditions and medication use. So
do you mean that the medication is causing that, or do you mean that they're concerned about that they're on that medication?
It's really common for women that are already on medication to go into, well, often in pregnancy, medications are changed, but during breastfeeding, the medications might be changed. They might be advised, you don't need that at the moment, or it's better for the baby if you don't take that. It's always a good idea to be minimizing medication use, but not at the expense of the breastfeeding relationship. It's something to be preserved if possible, and the majority of medications are okay to be using while you're breastfeeding, and for those that are not, there are generally alternatives available. So it's very, very rare for a mother to actually need to stop breastfeeding because of medication. But we do have research that tells us that women that are told that they need to stop their medication so that they can breastfeed, those women are not going to continue breastfeeding.
Right. What is there a dominance of particular types of medication that is? I'm thinking in particular of antidepressants. Is there like a, I mean, obviously if somebody, for example, is dealing with cancer and they are taking radioactive drugs, now that's not conducive to breastfeeding, we get that, but there are certain medications that are absolute no-nos, but they're rare, right? Most situations of disease, pre-existing medical conditions, as you say, most times either the medicine is regarded as safe, or there's an alternative that's regarded as safe. But is there a particular, as I say, is it sort of anti-anxiety, antidepressant? Do they kind of stand out to you, or?
Yeah, they're definitely the most common ones, and it's
right.
I get really surprised at how often I hear of women being told to stop their antidepressant when they're breastfeeding or during pregnancy. or or now's the time, maybe you might like to try without it. We've got pretty good evidence now that says that pregnancy and breastfeeding is not the time to be changing those types of medications. We should be having those conversations preferably before pregnancy, but if we miss that boat, it's not the time to be making major changes to your life.
No. Yeah, and there's also, do you find a little bit of a crazy sort of misunderstanding that sometimes women will take medication during the pregnancy, but then once they start lactating and they're breastfeeding this baby, they think, oh, I can't do that because I'm breastfeeding. Like, I could do it when I was pregnant, but I can't do it when I'm breastfeeding. And actually, things are like in reverse. Because,
absolutely.
Right? Because when the baby's inside the woman, that is, those drugs are filtering through the bloodstream at really identical amounts. So what's in the mother's bloodstream is the same level that's in the baby's bloodstream, because if the blood crosses the placenta, it crosses over via osmosis, right? And the same thing with breast milk, that generally, oversimplifying things, but generally the same level of medicine is in the woman's blood supply as in the woman's breast milk supply. But the difference is that when the baby swallows it, it then has to go through their liver bypass system. So by the time that medicine enters into the baby's bloodstream, it's far diluted.
That's right.
Right? Yeah, it's far diluted. So I don't know if you and often drugs, when medicine passes through the liver, which happens to all of us every time we swallow something, it goes through this liver bypass before it gets into our bloodstream. And with some medications, the liver bypass can remove potency of a drug by 90% sometimes, right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And often the drug's actually already been through those processes in the mother's body before it makes it into the milk. So really getting generally quite small doses in the milk, and then because the baby's taking small amounts of the milk, it's quite a small dose that they're ingesting, and then they're absorbing even less of it. So generally speaking, the medication use is not a problem for the baby. It can interfere in milk supply, with milk supply. Some drugs can change a woman's supply, might make it.
Is there any particular chronic disease that you find that's more common with? Particular kinds of drugs that actually do reduce supply? Or is it just more not very often that would happen?
It's fairly infrequent, but it's a possibility with all drugs. And I think anytime a mother's taking medication and she experiences supply problems, it's always important to go back to the drug and to look at how that may affect milk supply. So my favorite tool for this is the LactMed database, and I'm sure that a lot of people out there are quite familiar with that tool. But anytime you're talking medications and breastfeeding, you go to LactMed, check the medication, check what you might expect to see from the baby, check what you might expect to see on the milk supply, and you need to be giving supportive options to mum to help her, work with those possibilities if there's a chance that her supply might be affected. Just make sure she knows what to expect, and that she knows what to do if something does happen.
So if we go back to low milk supply, when do you what maybe are the red flags for you when you can fairly quickly assess that Yeah, that's a low milk supply. And then what's your next steps from there when it's actually not perception, but yeah, you can
when it's
justify
actually
say,
low
yeah,
milk
that's
supply.
low.
Yeah.
How do you pick that up, and then what's your next steps from there?
Well, the first thing we would be seeing is a baby that's not perhaps as energetic as we would expect them to be, although we can't rely on that as a sign. But often that's the first thing you see. Hungry babies tend to be tired and floppy, not necessarily loud and demanding.
Right, yeah, and that can be deceptive, right? Because that baby's kind of running out of energy, so it's just lying there looking so content, and actually it's not. But do you I was trained using that there was a word that would use a wizened looking baby. Is that a term that
I've
you've
never
heard?
heard that one. Tell us about that.
It's when the baby's it's not often that you see it, because to be honest, it's not, well, from my experience with my clientele, it wasn't very often that I would see a genuinely underfed baby, Sorry, can you hear that?
No, can't hear anything.
Okay. I think I've got a fire alarm going off.
Oh.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's not very often that you see these, the babies that are, honestly, they are failing to thrive, but there's this look on their face where they screw up they get all wrinkly in their forehead when they are trying to latch on, and we call it this wizen look, because it's like a wrinkly old man. And the two things I'd say is they have this wizen look where they're really kind of looking frustrated and annoyed at the supply, but it's a rare one. It's not just tossing their head around. They're not tossing, they're frowning. And they've got like a scrawny look to them. And they also have this quite pathetic cry.
Yeah, it's not a full cry. It's
not a full cry,
yeah,
no. It's really kind of,
yeah.
It's half-assed cry.
Yeah. And we certainly don't want anybody to be getting to that point. There's no reason for babies in either of our countries to be experiencing that, really. So we're hoping that healthcare systems pick up issues like this before it gets to that point. So I guess going back to what kinds of signs I would look for, one of my favorite things, because I love to give tools that mums can just, that they've got everything that they need at their fingertips. They don't need to go and get a scale or find a measuring device. I like them to know that they can, that they've got the information in them already. So I like to just ask them to feel their boobs. So you'll feel your boob. Do you feel it filling up and getting empty? Do you feel it getting heavy before a feed? Does it feel lighter after a feed? And you actually do get to know. You know what your boobs feel like, and you know if they're...
And there'd be that thing when I remember from myself with breastfeeding, where you go to feed your baby and you just kind of go,
yep.
Oh yeah, that one.
Which one is it?
Which one am I up to? You just grab your
That's
hand
right.
and have a good feel.
And that's a fantastic way to do it as well, because it means that, you're not like, people use bands on their arm. Oh, I can't remember which one it is. That's the best way to do it, because actually you want to be working with the one you want to be draining a breast before you swap them over. So if you still, feel your boobs, babe.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
And then what are the strategies that you tend to put in place when you know that there is a bit of a supply issue?
Well, the first strategy for me is always to help mum connect with with her ability to be producing oxytocin. So first strategy is, okay, what do you need taken care of for the next couple of days while you just focus on milk supply? Who are you going to put in charge of that? How are we going to make sure that you can get 2 days, 2 to 3 days of just lounging about with your baby, feeding them whenever they squeak, cuddling them as much as you like, skin to skin contact as much as possible, snooze, rest. All of those things are going to help reduce cortisol. They're going to help increase oxytocin. They're going to help. It's just all good milk making stuff. And I think that that's the best place to start. After that, then we can start to use strategies like putting the baby back to the breast after a feed before you might top up. Like if a woman needs to use some kind of top up, whether it's expressed milk or formula or whatever it is, try putting the baby back to the breast before you offer the top up, and then put the baby back to the breast again, so that you're getting plenty of stimulation on the nipples, and you're still getting plenty of skin to skin contact and all of those signals that tell your body to make more milk.
And what because obviously there's sometimes latch issues, and it might be that the baby has a tongue tie, or it might be that the woman has just incredibly flat or inverted nipples. But I'm interested to know what your experience is of women who have perceived latch issues versus genuine latch issues.
That's an interesting one, because I would actually consider a perceived latch issue to also be a latch issue. I think we have to really trust mums when they say this doesn't feel right. And I guess really early on, so the mums that you would see as a midwife in those really early days are perhaps a little bit different to the mums that I might see as a lactation consultant working.
Well, that's a good question itself. What would be the commonest time where you hear from somebody?
There's a couple. So there's like as soon as they get out of the hospital, and then there's probably around about the 1 month, 6 week to 8 week mark. So that time where it really starts to get intense, where it was all fun and games to start with, but now it's all starting to get a little bit too much, or after they've been dealing with these problems for a period of time, and
because those first couple of weeks are such a haze, and you've got the baby naturally losing weight and then regaining its weight. And we like to see babies back at their birth weight by sort of about day 10 or day 14 on the outside, sort of thing. Sometimes premature babies can take a little bit longer. We sort of tend to give them 3 weeks. It would still, earlier is better, but but then once the baby has got back to their birth weight, from that point onwards, with a fully exclusively breastfed baby, then the mother knows that she is the full supplier to that baby's weight gain, and that's when, or lack of weight gain, or perceived lack of weight gain, isn't it? That onerous responsibility comes on top of them, and I can imagine that's where they've been doing that, so they have 2 weeks of sort of weight going down and back up naturally, and then they've sort of got another 3 or 4 weeks after that, and suddenly they're like 6 weeks on going, oh, this is not working. And the other thing, don't you find, is that around 6 weeks, often women are no longer oversupplying. So their whole synchronicity between the supply and the demand just starts to sort of even up. And so they can sometimes think like, oh my God, my supply is down. Whereas what's just happened is your supply, your baby's needs and your supply have just sorted themselves out.
Yeah.
And when you've got a baby that's making, as you say, who's 6 weeks old and is making half a dozen really heavy wet nappies every day and is putting on 150, 200 grams a week, is there a supply issue? No.
No, you're doing really great, Mum.
No, even though your breasts are not feeling so full. One of the things I would often explain to women is that in a baby's first 24 hours, they may only drink 30 mils in 24 hours. It's like 2 tablespoons of milk.
It's a tiny amount.
Right, it's tiny, right? And then within a month, at a month old, they might be drinking a litre a day. And so your breasts are going to overproduce, with engorgement and other things going on naturally at the beginning, because the baby's ability of milk consumption so rapidly increases that your body has to sort of overproduce initially for the baby to quickly catch up, and then that whole supply and demand synchronizes.
Yeah, then it kicks in. Yeah. So the first 6 to 8 weeks while lactation's establishing, that's all about hormones. Your hormones are helping to tell your body what you need to produce. Once that's over, it's then the supply and demand system that kicks in. So really, to start with, you want to be really encouraging that synchronicity of natural hormones, of the oxytocin, that's going to help you to have nice letdowns and help to make breastfeeding a lovely experience, and help you feel all nice and relaxed about the whole process.
Yeah, because stress is huge, right? Yeah, and
yeah,
exhaustion,
absolute
and women are going to be tired anyway.
Yeah, absolute antithesis to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And what would be your, I guess there's some supplements that you suggest for some women. What's your favorite go-tos?
Well, I like to suggest teas. Herbal teas are definitely my favorite. And I like to, just as a universal kind of thing that's generally appropriate for everybody, where you don't have to be watching out for supply issues or anything like that. Raspberry leaf is a beautiful herb to have as a tea. It's really nourishing. It'll help with the involution of the uterus. Got lots of benefits for the postpartum. So raspberry leaf is my
That's interesting, because I think a woman often have heard about raspberry leaf as a labour preparatory supplement. But I think that a lot of times women sort of think, oh, well, I've given birth now, so I'll just I don't need the raspberry leaf anymore, and this leftover sachet sit in the back of the pantry. But actually, so how any sort of level of teas a day that you sort of suggest, or?
I do like to suggest to mix it up. So if you're going to have maybe 6 cups of tea a day, make 3 raspberry leaf and choose another one that's going to be something that you like, something that's going to be beneficial. Oat straw is another one that I really like. Shatavari is another one that I really like, which is a beautiful nutritive Ayurvedic herb that's used a lot in the postpartum.
Yeah, that's a real woman goddess tonic, isn't it?
It is.
Shatavari?
Yes. Yeah, it is. So mixing them up a little bit, because that way you're getting fairly good levels of the plant nutrients and the plant chemicals in there that are going to help, but not too much.
And I guess fennel tea would be another one you'd be quite popular.
Yeah, it is. Fennel tea is quite popular, especially for babies that have got that are upset and have a lot of digestive problems, so that the fennel
Colicky.
will, colicky babies, fennel will go through the milk. It's not good for everybody, so just be on the lookout for anything that doesn't feel right. But
and those like breastfeeding, you can get like brands like Artemis and whatnot will make breastfeeding tea bags. I think Weleda do as well.
Yeah,
And you
Weleda's
like
got a lovely
those?
breastfeeding tea. Yeah, yep, I do. Really, any of those retail-based breastfeeding teas are going to be, they're going to be herbs that have been used historically, that have got lots of traditional evidence behind them, that don't have any safety concerns. So they're wonderful things
I
for
know
people
that
to reach out for.
Yeah, I remember with our babies, when I would drink, the breastfeeding herbal teas. Say ideally, I don't know what you suggest, but about 3/4 of an hour before feeding, so it kind of gets into the milk. And I remember with my first baby, when the first time I was using those or drinking those, and I wasn't a midwife when I had my when my babies were little, so it was all very much. I very much remember the huge learning curve on everything. But I would describe it that it was like if the babies could purr, they would. With it, it's like, I don't know. It's like it was like a little taste enhancement or something, and they'd be suckling, and you just see them go, oh, yum 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 yum. It's like that's just kind of the look on their face. You're like, oh, that's adorable.
That is cute.
And then
actually,
what about capsules, supplement capsules, and those sorts of things? What's your thoughts on those?
I prefer to avoid those. I feel like you can get a lot of therapeutic benefit with teas, especially when it comes to breastfeeding. As a naturopath, if I was like having to treat a mother's health conditions, so before we talked about chronic health conditions being a big contributing factor to mums stopping breastfeeding before they'd hoped.
Yeah.
So in that case, you often do need to use capsules and tablets, as you need to get good therapeutic doses into a mum. And I think if you're going to be using those kinds of things, then that really needs to be done by a professional. It's not something.
Right. But like be seeing a naturopath or a lactation consultant.
That's right. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
And preferably a naturopath, actually, because it's not really within a lactation consultant's scope of practice to know and understand natural medicines. I mean, they know them in the context of lactation consulting and how they may affect milk supply, or that, they need to know where to go to look to check on things, but they're not experts in natural medicines.
Yeah, so
but you
really
can get
talking
lactation
to your
consultants that are
medical herbalist. And often, there's this perception that seeing your midwife or having your obstetrician is your one go-to, and that's all you need. And midwives are tend to be very holistically looking, body, mind, spirit kind of aspect of their client. But certainly our obstetric colleagues tend to be very focused on physiological rather than psychological or spiritual type things. So, we would say that, midwives are the experts of normal, and obstetricians are the experts of abnormal.
Yeah.
So when there are, complications, obstetric complications in the pregnancy, then that's where we get our obstetric colleagues involved. But quite separately to that, we can't recommend, we talk about it all the time at IMCO and on the Ask the Maternity Gurus forum. But, we really try to encourage women to not just be seeing their unwellness specialist, which is their midwife and obstetrician, but they need to be engaging and seeing a wellness specialist, right? So yeah, you just as you go and have your pregnancy consultations with your obstetrician and midwife, you have your pregnancy consultations with your naturopathic maternity wellness clinician. That's what they do, is they, yeah. And you need both. You need the unwellness expert and the wellness expert.
Yes, yeah. And again, this is a common thing that women do during pregnancy. They're quite likely to go and see a naturopath to help manage pregnancy conditions, but once they're finished, like postnatal wellness is not something that's forefront in women's mind at that point. It's more about the baby, and all of the medical focus is really on the baby at that point. Now, there might be a few questions. Oh, how are you coping? Oh, that's nice, love.
Yeah, and that can be quite a shock, isn't it? You know, that it has been, the whole 9 months has all been about you and the baby and the labour and the birth, everything. It's been you. And the baby's born and it's all them.
Yeah. But we really need to be setting ourselves up for success to get to the end of that marathon of the first 12 months and still have our sense of selves intact and
So I guess
to feel
from
good
a
about it.
clinician to clinician kind of level of conversation, what would be your sort of ramping up the go-tos? You know, so this is what you'd start off with a woman, and then, you know, you'd take them to that and take them to that. I mean, because right at the sort of end of the cliff, I guess, is the point of a woman. There's a pharmaceutical drug called domperidone, which is sometimes prescribed. But, you know, both you and I see that as like that is the last thing that we go to. So what are your other things that you go to? So clinicians watching can sort of compare it to what their go-to progression has been.
Well, when you're talking about any kind of supply issue, it's really sorry, I lost my train of thought again.
So I just kind of that progression of, yeah, I mean, I sort of think like often it's, you know, it's that like giving them that 48 hours where there's just nothing that they're doing but being with their baby.
Yeah. So that's definitely the first,
It's like
the first
thing,
thing.
right?
That's where I would start, and that often can take care of things. It's just really important to, if you're using anything to try and improve milk supply, any kind of pharmaceutical, herbal, whatever, they're only going to be as effective as the milk removal. It's really important to make sure that you're putting baby to the breast frequently, that the milk is being removed frequently, and that is actually going to have a much bigger effect on your supply than anything that you're going to be taking. So,
and what's your thoughts about women, you know, when they're trying to increase that supply, that, you know, they are, you know, let's say they're doing that whole 48 hours or so, which is Ina May Gaskin will often talk about in her book Split, you know, where that's just all they're doing. You know, they're just sleeping, and they sleep, I always say, sleep when the baby sleeps, feed when the baby feeds, and just get on their hours, right? And do nothing but that. And obviously lots of sleep, lots of rest, lots of drinking water, lots of baby to the breast. And do you also suggest that they add in a bit of expressing in there as well in that 48 hours of just having more and more stimulation to the breast, or do you find just the baby alone is usually adequate?
it varies from mum to mum, bub to bub. Some babies are not happy to feed at the breast for as long as you might need them to, and a mum may need to use a breast pump to help stimulate her supply. Interestingly, breast pump use is one of the reasons that mums give for giving up breastfeeding before they're ready. They're like, I've had enough of this, I can't pump anymore. So adding in those extra extra things can be a bit of a barrier to actually continuing to breastfeed. So it is really important to individualize any kind of prescription around that. But the aim is for milk removal and nipple stimulation. Preferably we use the baby for that, because the baby is the best tool for that. That's,
Yeah.
We're designed to respond to that baby. But if baby's not able to do that, then a good breast pump is your best friend.
Cool. And then what's your next sort of progress up? What are the tools and resources that you sort of use then along the process?
So I would then look at a supply line. Have you worked with women using supply lines?
You mean like a Lactate?
Yeah, so it's basically just like it's almost like a drip bag that you can hang up, and you put a little tube that you just tape to the nipple, and the baby's able to get the supplemented feed from the breast. So mum's still getting nipple stimulation, baby's getting the supplement that they need, but they're still breastfeeding. So
that can work really well. And that's the same gadget that men can basically use for breastfeeding their baby, which is, I remember a first time I had a client that did that, and it was, we're going back quite a while, and it was like really out there at the time, but it's less out there now, so that's but in a regular situation of where it's a woman wanting to establish and feel like she's got that really good supply, how long on average would you find that women end up needing to use that? How long till it sort of gets the improvement going on?
It can be anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks. And I would say if mum's not noticing any benefit of doing that, or if she's feeling stressed after a couple of weeks, then I'd probably offer a different option.
Right. And 2 weeks is not huge in the whole big scheme of breastfeeding.
No, it's not. But I would actually say to continue doing that any time that baby needs supplementing.
Right.
So if you're unable to build up a full supply and your baby does need to be supplemented throughout that whole first 6 months, just continue doing it, but maybe not with the ambition of or the expectation of being able to build a full supply. I think it's important after a certain period of time to just check in with mum's expectations and help her do what she possibly can, but not to make it a stressful experience.
Yeah, and being aware from the beginning that successful establishment of breastfeeding for some women will occur quite quickly. It can be day 3 and wow, like it is done. That baby is totally successfully established. Everything has come together. But we've got to be honest, that's rare, right?
It's very rare. And even then,
it's rare.
a week at home and in the world, and it may all come unraveled then, or it may come unraveled in 8 weeks' time when baby gets a cold or something like that. So even when it is established, things happen. Even 8 months, 18 months, like.
Yeah, I would say that like roughly on the top of my head, I would say that does not, in that first, say 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks, that only occurs for about 10%.
Yeah, it's quite, I would agree, it's quite a low number.
It's low. I think most women have some challenges that they deal with.
Absolutely.
And with the right support, they can get over it. And it can be successfully resolved. And I know that with my client base, I would typically discharge women at about 4 to 5 weeks after they've given birth. And I would have 90% was my stat. 90% would be fully or exclusively breastfeeding at discharge. But that's a higher level than the amount who are fully and exclusively breastfeeding at 7 days.
Right.
Yeah, right. So at the, because we would do it at I think we do our stats at 1 day, at 24 hours, 7 days, and 4 weeks type of thing, and what's happening. And so there's just often this like little curve where there's like a little bit of assistance going on at the beginning, but with that right help, in that first 4 weeks, and of the 10% who were not fully or exclusively breastfeeding at a month old, a good half of those were still breastfeeding, but they may have still been supplementing at that point. And it was it would be really just quite a small number of women who were not breastfeeding, and most of those who were not had already made their mind up a long time ago that they weren't planning to breastfeed. You find that? But you would be seeing women, because you're looking after them, once they get to the problem and you're sort of their last solution. So with the woman coming to see you as their last solution, and they've kind of come in with all this baggage of this problem, there's a latch and they've done this and they did that, like they've got a whole backstory, right? What sort of percentage are you able to successfully, get them into established or re-established breastfeeding by the time that you're seeing them?
Well, I would say, so my measure is always against what the mother's goals are and what she considers success. So I would consider it a success story if mum wants to continue some breastfeeding. If she comes to me with problems and she's really up against it, she's losing her supply, and her aim is to get to 6 months and to continue giving her baby some breast milk, then I would consider that a win too. So I would say it's probably about 80%.
So high.
Yeah.
Just once they get that support.
Yeah. And if a woman does get to the end of that, and she has given it all that she can, she's worked with me, she's done what she feels that she can do, she's at least happy that she's done what she can. And
yes, and that's a huge part as well, isn't it? That they can put their hand on their heart and go, well, I know I did everything in my power. And whereas when women don't reach out, there can be this guilt that sits there where they feel they failed. And that's not good for anybody, is it?
No, absolutely not. Especially for the next experience, for women that have that experience and then have another baby again, a year or two later, it can be, that's already an anxiety that they're carrying into the experience, and it makes it difficult for them again second time around. I think it's really important to remember that each breastfeeding experience is different, and that includes between children in the same mother.
That's something that I experienced themselves can be different personalities.
Yeah, that's right.
And you've just got some babies who are voracious feeders, and some babies who are sort of petite feeders, and it's and that is who they are.
And it can take time to work through anatomical kind of fit issues, and it just takes time.
So that's probably one of the biggest things is that as women being really understanding that to expect their breastfeeding to be successfully established with a baby beautifully, productively latched every time on every feed, and that's all come together within the first week of having your baby, is really an unrealistic expectation.
It really is.
Yeah, and it's about saying, look, you just need to know it's going to take about a month for the whole thing to come together, and then if it comes together quicker than that, yay, and if it takes a little bit longer, they're like, oh, okay, well, she said about a month, and for me it came together by 6 weeks. So we probably drive ourselves as women. We're probably the biggest harm of our own expectations. But look, we are getting close to time here. So anything else that you want to conclude with and go over?
Look, I think my biggest message would be that it really does start in pregnancy, or even further back, preconception. These are conversations that we need to be having with mums before they have their baby. They need to know what to expect. They need to know what the common pitfalls are. They need to know how they're going to navigate those situations when they're presented with them. So help pregnant mums to make sure that they've got a support network in place for when their baby's born. Help them to have a list of people that they can reach out to for good help and support. Help them to know the difference between good information and not so good information, because that can makes such a big difference when it comes to breastfeeding.
Yeah, that's so huge. And it's like before you are in labour and giving birth to this baby, having already touched base with, and maybe an older sister or some girlfriends, but women who have successfully breastfed a couple of babies is such an advantage.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And just being able to say to them, hey, listen, I know that you've, successfully breastfed a couple of babies. Would you be okay as being my kind of go-to if I've got any questions, and maybe you could pop round and give me a hand? And those women, they'll be going, heck yes,
Yes.
like, yes, I absolutely, I'll come in and I'll help you.
Yeah.
But what can be quite damaging is having the opinion coming through from women who have not successfully breastfed.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Do you find that they do like almost more damage than help sometimes, because their go-to was just to mix up some formula and shove a bottle in, and so that's their solution. I mean, that's, I don't mean that judgmentally as that sounded, but like that's that was their tool in their toolbox.
Yeah.
And yeah, so just touching base before having the baby, and asking those girlfriends to put their, or putting a message out on your Facebook page with your girlfriends,
or join a peer support association.
Yes.
In Australia, it's Australian Breastfeeding Association. We've got the Litchi League all over the place.
Yes, Lalish League is international. Joining them, touching base and finding that resource that will be your go-to. Because even in locations where midwives do home visits, we are still only talking of them visiting. It could be 4 or 5 times in 4 or 5 weeks. So, they're not able to sit there for hours with you. It's a bit of a fleeting in and out in a way. So having that big sister or girlfriend or someone that can come into your lounge and sit with you on the couch.
Yeah, make your cup of tea.
And make your washing. Cup of tea. Yeah. Look, thank you so much, Julie. It's always such a wonderful pleasure having you on. And Julie is one of our very valued voluntary team here at IMCO. And her expert. She is our go-to lactation expert. And thank you to those who are live here today. And we know lots of other people watch this down the track as well. So before, actually, the final thing is, do you want to just go over your contact information as well?
Well, is my website up at the moment? You can contact me through naturaltransition.com. Website's a bit of a work in progress at the moment. It's kind of moving on to different things. You can email me at julie@naturaltransition.com. You can find me through the Imico Facebook page. You could also tag me on the Ask a Maternity Guru page.
Yes, so that's a Facebook forum, Ask for Maternity Gurus. And Julie is one of the experts that we have voluntarily helping women with particularly women who are in countries where it's very difficult for them to get advice sometimes. Yeah, we certainly have a lot of Filipinos and a lot of Americans would be the biggest users of that forum. But women from all over the world. So thank you so much, Julie. And we just want to wish everybody a wonderful rest of their day. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.